the moment I opened
Yeah.
this book, it was just magic because, well, do you know what? There's no there's no formal start point to this. It's just a very conversational
Great.
style.
Yeah.
But I'd love to tell you, I'd love to just tee you up with a little story. So I've got this drawing here,
Please.
which I stole this
Ah.
um, from the local market. So I'm in Salisbury in the southwest in the UK, and
Okay.
it's it's a very quaint market town. It's a nice place to raise a family. I wish it had a little bit more creative spark. We're trying to work on that. But
Yeah. Sure.
what's awesome is so they had this market, and there was a kind of dinosaur dig thing set up for kids, and they had a little drawing table. They had a sand thing where you dig up little fossils and all this cool stuff. So we took the kids down
Yeah.
there when they were about 3, and I saw this little boy making that drawing, and I was spellbound because I've been an illustrator for 20 years, and
Right.
I also teach and coach and do all the other things around it as we tend to do.
Yeah.
And so I was just in awe. I've got a very organic, naive style, and I was watching this little boy make this incredibly naive drawing of a shark, and my jaw had dropped, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
that is incredible. What I'd give for that drawing. And to the point of your book, which I'm sure you'll be able to elaborate on in a moment, the kid just tosses the thing aside, runs after his dad. And
Yeah.
I gave it about 3 minutes and thought, he's not coming back. I'm having that. So I grabbed it and I stole it and I took it home and I've had it on my studio wall ever since. And I've written pieces
Perfect.
about just that piece of artwork because it's
Yeah.
incredible. But there's magic in the fact that that little boy does not give a shit.
Didn't care. Just left it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was it. I mean, and that's it. And that story is pretty much good night, folks. Like that's the book. That really like that encounter that you had. That was the kind of encounter I was having, like, on a daily basis with my own kids because they went about their work with that sense of, I mean, it wasn't even work, it was just they were just doing stuff. They were making stuff, they were drawing, and I just was just so just watching my son Jules draw when he was like 3 was just like the most fun I've ever had watching someone else work. Maybe other than like watching Elisa Loose skate or something like that, but he would just like be in it. And Jules would do this thing that I loved where he would stop in the middle of a drawing and he'd just kind of stand back and look at it and he'd pump his fists like he was like he would like get pumped up and like shake and like be visibly like excited, and then he would go back to it, and then he'd look at it when it was done and just like throw it on the ground. He would just throw it and then start another one, and it was just about being in the drawing. And so I had the experience that you did, which was just like, how can how can I get some of that? Like how can I steal some of that for myself? Like how could I have some of that for myself in the studio? And the thing you immediately realize is like you can't just tell people like, "Well, be like a 4-year-old," because you can't just be like a 4-year-old. That doesn't work. But I think what I came around to is that you can give yourself the kind of conditions that a 4-year-old has, which is a safe place to play, plenty of stuff to play with, uh, uninterrupted time, um, love and care in a sense that they know they can kind of go wild and someone's going to pick up after them later, kind of, you know what I mean? And so that was the kind of things with my boys, because I don't know how you felt with your kids, but people kept asking me like, well, when are you going to do a book about how to make kids more creative? And I'm like, they don't need a book. Like what they need is for me to stay out of their way mostly, and give them the right stuff. But otherwise, like, there's nothing I can actively do other than to set up the world for them where they can let it rip. But we sure could use a book to be like more like them. You know what I mean? So it's just like, so yeah, that was like the big leap for me. But I was also really inspired by, there's a cartoonist named Linda Berry, who's like kind of one of my personal heroes. And Linda has this program where she takes 4-year-olds and puts them with university students. Because her feeling is that there's no one sadder than like a PhD student, like a graduate student. Like they get very sad. They've like been in school forever and they're like cranking away on this thing. And she had this idea that if she could pair 4-year-olds with grad students, that they could kind of heal each other, they could do some healing work together. And so I stole a lot from her when I was with my own kids because I quickly realized that, so many of the problems I hear from the people who read my books, for my audience and stuff like that, I really did feel like, a lot of this would go away if you just spent the afternoon with the 4-year old and kind of like got in that, if
Yeah.
you could get in that 4-year-old mindset, for, and not the whole time. And that's something like with the book is like, you can't run your whole career like a 4-year-old, right? That's not the point of the book, right? But there's a time and a place to let that kind of wild, creative kid that we have in us out. And that's what I wanted to write about.
Well, I think it's a beautiful angle. I think it's just so natural and raw from kids. And now, of course, it's a misconception to think we can just consciously return to that, as you just said. But I think the point is, and it reminds me of those, it almost reminds me of those beautiful things where you hear about kids of that age going into care homes and spending time with elderly
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
many benefits that come from that. That would be too much of a segue. But I think that there's something about, I would love, as an artist, I would just love to sit in the middle and be unseen and be invisible in the middle of
Yeah.
those kind of conversations. And I think it's about a mindset shift, isn't it? It's about that idea that you can practice spontaneity, and that simplicity is so hard to achieve and get right. I have one of those
Yeah.
illustrative styles you can probably see on the image behind me up there. It's not
I
one of my
love
kids.
it.
That's one of mine, and it's
Yeah.
that takes a lot of training. That's that
Yeah.
to unlearn to that
Yeah.
degree is really the skill in that, and you can spend decades trying to get that right. So I can completely see the angle of just spending time around 4-year-old kids, because that's beautiful, and there is so much they can teach us, and there's so much that I've learned just from your book as a parent. And it's not necessarily about parenthood either, is it? It's not everyone's got access to kids. And I love that you say borrow a kid in the book,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
fantastic. But
So there's so much that you're saying that I'm like, stop, let's unpack this. Because,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
first of all, like your point about all the training it takes to have your style. One of my favorite quotes that I came across was by this painter named Sam Messer. And he says, people come up to me and say, my kid could do that. And he turns around and says, yeah, but you couldn't. Because it's like, yeah, but you couldn't, and Picasso was such a great he said this over and over again. He's like, it's taken me my whole life to return to the way that these kids draw. Like you have to go through that whole cycle of absorbing everything and mastering and then going back to like square one. So like that thing that you said, I think is really beautiful and something I wanted to address in the book. But the other thing that you said that I'm like really, really interested in is, you've got kids on one side, like you'd love to pair like preschoolers with like nursing home or seniors, uh and put yourself in the middle. I am in the middle of that right now because I have aging parents, and then I've been around like little kids, and I think that's what middle age is in a lot of ways. And I think it's really interesting when you hang out with both groups, what they don't have is a lot of worry. I think a lot of like artists worry. What if I'm not any good? What if I starve to death? Like, what if people laugh at me? What if like they have all this like anxiety and worry and everything? And I think that the older you get, the less the worries disappear. That my experience with older people, I have a neighbor. It's actually cognac night tonight. I have a neighbor who's 77, and we have cognac every week. And getting he's let's see, he's like 30, he's like 35 years ahead of me, and my kids are like 30 years, but like so he's like 30 years ahead of me, and like my kids are like 30 years behind me, right? And so I think the one like really rich thing about middle age is that you are in between those. And I think you need them because what this age is about is a lot of worry. You got a lot of
yeah.
responsibilities. You got a lot of stuff on your shoulder. For one thing, you're raising these little kids. If you have kids, you're raising little ones, and then you got these aging parents. And it's like, if you're lucky to still have them be alive and that kind of thing. And so it's like you are kind of in the middle. You are holding a lot. But I think that what I'm really interested in is this idea that we can kind of generationally teach each other, and not in the sense that it's always backwards, like my neighbor that I drink with is telling me all the time, you want to be part of something that's growing always. And so I think that's like the gift of kids is that they're just coming alive to the world, so they just don't have they don't know all the names for everything. They don't know what everything is. They haven't figured things out, and that's what makes them so creatively powerful. Because when we're in middle age, we're like, well, I pretty much have everything figured out and I'm bored. That's kind of what depression is. I think
Hmm.
depression is when your brain is certain that it's seen it all, like in a sense, in that there's not really anything, left to live for because it's like, I've kind of like, I know everything that's out there. It's a kind of certainty, and I think certainty is kind of the death of any creative urge because I
Yeah.
think the creative urge is very much about like going out and discovering things. Even if it's like, well, I've got an hour, I've got a blank piece of paper and my stuff, what's going to appear? You know what I mean? So I didn't mean to derail you, but like some of the things you were saying, I'm like, these are my favorite things to
No,
talk
it's
about.
I mean,
You know?
I love the organic conversation. It's all, I have a skeleton of questions, but there's no way
Yeah.
there's no wrong path, you know. But I think again, you hit on something really important there, and I'm 43 now, and I'm on the tail end of a
I'm the
severe
same
mid.
age. I'm about to turn 43,
Oh,
by the
okay,
way.
brilliant.
So
Uh,
like next
okay,
week. Yeah.
okay. So yeah, so there's going to be okay. So well, I think we're going to get each other here. This is good. Um, but I'm on the tail end of a severe midlife crisis, and I'm not
Yep.
talking about sports cars and affairs, but I'm talking about the existential. I'm an artist. I've got that
Yeah.
brain, and you alluded to it there about the sensitivity and the worries and the neuroses. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's like we tend to be quite caring people, or at least we see the layers in the world. And
Yeah.
the downside of that is we just send ourselves into spirals of unnecessary weight on our shoulders. Maybe sometimes it's necessary, but I think a lot of the time it's inflated. And
Yeah.
there's something about both of those ages that you mentioned there where they've just completely shed inhibition for two very different reasons.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's beautiful. And I'm trying to get back to that kind of reckless bravery that I had when I was 28 and starting out as an illustrator with, a few hundred quid in the bank and people, my sort of dad
Yeah.
going, are you sure that's going to work? And I'm going, no,
No.
but in here I feel that it will. So I'm going to give it a
Yeah.
good go because I'm passionate
Yeah.
about it. And kids are awesome at that. Um, again,
But
maybe
like
not the most.
you're right on. I think we're right on time too. Like some of my reading, I'm really into Jungian stuff. So like I find that
Yeah.
Jungian therapy is like really helpful for midlife because you're not even allowed to become a Jungian therapist until you're like 35 or something. So they're Jung was great at like thinking about midlife. But like the thing about like what you're saying too is I think that creative, imaginative people, when they're young, I think if I was going to build an art school, which I never went to art school, so I don't even know what art school's like, but I would counsel creative people. One of the things I would love to say to creative people now that I'm older is say, hey, you have an imaginative brain. You can think of the most beautiful things, and you've got all the stuff you want to do, and you like want to make all this stuff and put it in the world. It's a double-edged sword because we never talk about the dark part of imagination. And I think that if the because if you can imagine the most beautiful things happening, you can also imagine the worst things happening,
Mhm.
right? Like that is the imagination. And so I think that's where a lot of the struggle with creative people comes from is like you can project so much and you're right, you're so sensitive. You take so much in. I mean, the artist is almost like a. Did Back to the Future? I mean, you're the
Yeah.
right age, you're the right age for this. So I like in the Back to the Future sequels, Doc Brown mods the DeLorean, the time machine, with the I think it's called why am I losing the name of it? He has this like nuclear thing where he dumps trash into it. Mr. Fusion in the top of the and I always thought like, oh, the artist's job is to like take in all this beauty and then put beauty out. And lately I've been like, no, like the artist really absorbs a lot of trash. Like the artist is almost like a Mr. Fusion. Like we take a lot of the like bad and because we're so sensitive, and the world has so many, problems with it, and you just like take it in and you take it in a lot, and that's part of the job. And then you try to like do something with it. I mean, the training is that it gives you something to do with all that stuff that you take in. And that can be like really, really hard on you, and like it could go really wrong, But I do think one thing that's cool about being an artist is that everyone's taking in crap all the time now, like with social media and just everything going on. Everyone's taking things in now, but artists are special in the sense that they have something they can do with it. Like we have a practice, we have a
Yes.
ritual, we have a routine, we have something that we can do with our hands and our heads and our hearts to actually like shape something out of it. And so I think so many of us who are creative right now, we're just like, it's so crushing, everything that's going on. But I think one thing that you can really hold on to is your own practice, right? Like the thing that you've trained for, the thing that you do. This is the time to really like keep doing it, and to find new stuff with it because like on the one hand, it's like, ugh, I should have become a banker, you know, whatever. But on the other hand, it's like you have this thing that can keep you alive. It's kept you alive this long.
And gives you incredible, and I think it's massively undervalued, but just the power of art and creativity in the world to tell stories, to bring communities
Yeah.
together. And but even on the most micro level, because I think when we think of that, too many people get into the mistake of thinking, well, it's got to be profound, it's got to be big and
Yeah.
immediately life changing. No,
Hmm.
actually, giving someone a drawing or a poem on a train, I have a friend who does that sometimes, can change a life.
Yeah.
Or just being nice to people and being open on the
It's a
most simple
creative
level.
act.
It
It's a
is a
creative
creative act.
act.
It's also an ecological
Yeah.
act because if we're
Yes.
optimistic and we're rebelliously defiant in this world, which I actually think rebellious optimism is one of the strongest skills you can have in this world today.
Oh, I
And I
love
think
that.
and I think that I had this conversation with Tyler Schlossberg, who's in New York, and she's a brilliant motion designer. And she was feeling the weight of the world when we had our conversation. But we got onto this idea of rebellious optimism and just being prepared to kind of work through all the things we're exposed to and still see value in your cause in making that art and sharing it with passion. Because I've had 20 years of experience in doing that and seeing the serendipity it creates and even in
Yeah.
the most subtle ways. And to go back to kids, I think kids do it naturally. We have to work a little harder for it, especially now in
Yeah.
midlife.
Well, because they have to, like they're just coming on, like they just got here, and like it's like they got to live their life, and that this is the world. They don't know the world any differently either.
Hmm.
Like this is what they were like born into. I love that rebellious optimism. I mean, this is kind of the thing that I'm playing with a lot in this book was the idea of choosing to behave as though something was true. Like, I think, like, because I think when you get to I think this is something that when you're younger, or at least like in your 20s or something, you think that you need to be like super authentic. Like that the beliefs you hold need to be things that you like, that you're super interested believe in and whatever. And I think the older I get, the more I'm like, I'm interested in believing in things that the outcome that are it's not it's almost like a kind of pragmatism. It's like what is useful about this belief, right? So one of the things I was playing with, and I was inspired by Elizabeth Gilbert and what she writes about in Big Magic, but this kind of idea that like, what if you just choose to believe that there's magic in the world? Like, what if you choose to believe because kids think the world is magic because it just makes sense. Well, like, well, I have thoughts. Why wouldn't a tree have thoughts? Or
Hmm.
why wouldn't a dog have thoughts too? Why wouldn't a dog love me as much as I love it? That kind of thing. They have that magical thinking. Like I remember walking around one night and the moon was up and you know one of my sons said, "Hey, look, Papa, the moon's following us." And it's like and that's happening like all the time, every day. Like parents get desensitized to it. But it's like, okay, what if this kind of magical thinking like what if that could be I think it's generative. What you need to find is you need to find beliefs that are generative. And one of the things that I do is I'm like, that's something I learned from like walking around with my kids is like I take a walk every day with my wife and I always before I start the walk think what's the theme going to be today? Like, what am I going to see today? What messages are the universe going to send to me? And what that does, it's not that the universe actually sends me things, which maybe it does, but it's that you pay attention in a certain way, right? And that's what the artist is doing. The artist is looking at the world in a certain way to find the stuff, right? That to find those little bits and pieces. And that's why I really like being an artist. I like having a creative practice because, like, for example, I'm a writer, and so like all day long, I'm going around looking for weird words. Like I just like I pay attention to signs and like funny saying, just like stuff like even to the point I live in a neighborhood in Austin where everyone's tearing their house down and building like a $2 million, what monstrosity. And I love to pay attention to like the names of the demolition companies, Like one of the companies is called Texas Teardown. And I'm just like, this is
Wow.
like this is literally these people chose this name like for their company, but then I'm thinking about like tear down the idea of like there's a show called Fixer Upper here. I don't know if that's over. I don't know if they use the same, but I'm always asking myself like, are we a tear down or a fixer upper? As I walk around America, it's like, are we a tear down or a fixer upper? But like that's the kind of playful state that I'm always in because I
Yeah.
love words. If you're an artist, it could be like I have another friend who's a painter. He's always looking for textures. He's looking at the sides of old buildings and the way paint peels and like stuff like that. But the thing about having a creative practice and the thing that you're really into is that it changes the way you look at the world. And I think
Yeah.
that's what art is supposed to do. Like the best, like when I go to a David Hockney show and I spend some time there, and I come out of it, it's like I see the world like David Hockney all this. Everything looks like a Hockney to me.
Yeah.
And that's the power. You know what I mean? And you've had that experience where you like go to a show that's really like reconfiguring your stuff inside, and you come out and you see a certain way. And I think that's like with the kids, that's something that a 4-year-old can do with you too, because 4-year-olds kind of skip the stage of being they already see the world the way an artist does. Like it's already psychedelic and weird, and there's all this stuff. Like my favorite story about this is I took my kids to the art museum when they were really little. I love taking kids to the art museum before they have language, before they can read, which was really early for my kids, so it was kind of hard. But like, um, when you take kids to the museum before they can read, they can't read the signs. So it's like they're having that kind of pure, they don't know what's important. They don't even know what's art. So the really fun thing for me when I was going to the museum with my kids is they would always get down on the floor and look at these neon exit signs that were by the doorway of this museum in Austin, the Blanton Museum. And I have pictures of them both on the floor, like looking at these signs. And I thought, oh my God, they don't need this. We're walking around this museum and like these kids, they don't need the museum because the point of the museum for us is to spark something in us, to get us to wake up
Mhm.
to our environment, to see something new. But they already have it. They don't need the museum. Everything's art.
Well, they just want to run around the big open space.
Yeah, and like they want to run around and look at all the cool stuff. And when my kids were looking at those exit signs, I had this flashback to being in the Art Institute in Chicago here, which is just fabulous. I mean, just like some of the best. If anyone's ever watched the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is also our generation, they go to this museum that I'm talking about. And I remember getting in this so much. Do you ever do this? Like when I go to an art museum sometime, especially if I've had like an extra cup of coffee or something, I just start vibrating, especially when I'm in a good museum. I get like sensory overload and I just like kind of get in this like, ooh, like just this overstimulated kind of crazy state where I'm just like, I get really greedy and I want to see more. And like I'm going around. I remember one time I was in the Chicago Art Institute and I saw this machine sculpture, this like sculpture that had this like it was like it had all these dials and it like looked just like a machine and like there was this big like tube that ran up and like into the ceiling and I was like, "Whoa, like look at this sculpture, dude, this is crazy. What do you think this is? I don't see a label for this thing." And whoa, cool. And I like went over to the museum guard. I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you like know what this thing is, or like do you know who made this, or is there a label somewhere I can see?" And she looked at me and she goes, "It keeps the paintings from melting." It was the
That's
AC. It
tremendous.
was like the AC system, you know. But like that's what kids. If you bring kids to the art museum, like they probably there's just as much chance of them skipping the Van Gogh and going straight to the air conditioner and
Yeah.
say, "Look at this thing. What do you think this does?" Right? But that's the whole point. That's what we're trying to do.
But is that not the kind of analog version of why we should swerve the algorithm? It's like,
Absolutely.
it's you're going it's you're not doing it you're not doing it in a very hipster way, like, oh, I'm only interested in the aircon bit over there. That's just a
Right.
very natural response to something that you interpret as beautiful. And what you said there about, the way you perceive your natural environment, it's things I do in workshops when I'm coaching. I have an exercise called Cheeky Batman, and this was born because of my kids. And when I'd not long moved to Salisbury, I was walking through the local park, and there's a little electricity box, part of the street furniture at the bottom. And on it was this really crappy marker pen doodle, and it looked remotely like Batman. And I pointed it out to them one day, and the magic, you mentioned magic there. I totally believe in magic in the sense that you think of it there, that in the kind of perception sense and the felt sense. Every subsequent walk after that, they would run ahead with absolute glee to get to cheeky Batman, and
Cheeky
and
Batman.
it reminded me of the potential for magic in anything, anything
Yes.
around us. It's about the willingness and the openness to interpret in the way that 4-year-olds do. And that was beautiful. So it's an exercise I kind of take some of my clients through in just bringing back a little more magic in the way they see the banal and the overlooked and just the potential in everything. And you talked about that kind of stasis and the fear that sensitive people get earlier. Well, yeah, we're getting drowned in information and the sense that we need to be all things to everybody and learn these tools and AI. And I was relieved to hear you talking on another interview about, your own kind of, let's just say, dubiousness, to keep it light, of AI. But
Yeah.
also the fact that you just are analog. I'm completely analog. My organization system is still an A5 school exercise book. It's like, and it's
Yeah.
not a choice. That's just, I have to do it that way. That's how I'm wired. But I don't know what my point is in all of that. But it's like,
No.
it's
Well, like I if the computer it's I don't know. So like 20 years ago, people have asked me so much stuff about AI, and I'm such a Linda Berry disciple that when I met Linda 20 years ago, longer than 20 years ago, 21 years ago, I got to talk to her a little bit, and she said, as long as the hand is in it, I'm good. Like, because I was talking to her about how, well, I make some of my drawings on the computer, and I could tell she was like, but I was like, I use one of these Wacom pens and whatever, and she said, well, as long as the hand is in it. That was the thing she said to me. But the thing is like 20 years ago, when the internet was really like coming alive, just going crazy, and everyone was starting a blog, and there was all this potential, I kind of took a step back and said, I think I'm going to throw in with the handmade because at the time I felt that it was a differentiator. Like I was like, hey, like there aren't that many people that know what a scanner is and know how to run one, and not many people know how to optimize an image so you can put it on your blog. I mean, this is going to sound like ancient history to people, but there was a time where one, you didn't have a cell phone that you could just take a great picture of something with, like, or get a drawing up on your blog. You'd have to have like a flatbed scanner or something. And then even when you did take a scan, you would want to make that image low res enough that people could actually like download it, like, and it would come up on the internet. You know what I mean? So it's just like things like this. But I thought even at that time, I thought, drawing, using things by hand, that was going to be a thing that differentiated. So I was doing it almost like as a kind of like, well, I don't want to be like everyone else, which is a natural creative impulse. But then the thing that happened through all that is it's like I discovered, oh, wait a minute, this is literally a different way of processing the world than clickety clacky on the computer or whatever. That the experience of having tactile materials. You mentioned your notebook. I'm like, where's my notebook? Oh, it's in my pocket. Just like this is just so this experience is unbeatable. It really is. And I think the one thing that I would say is that to me, I'm going to use the word magic again. To me, the magic is the interplay between analog and digital. That's kind of what I've experienced in my career, is the idea that when I'm here in this space doing all these analog things, the end of that is probably going to be me coming over here, to the scanner or with the phone or whatever, and bringing it to this device here and pushing it out into the world. And then all these people get it, and then they have a experience with it. You know what I mean? So it's not that I don't love digital stuff. I do. It's just that I like the dance, the interplay
Yeah.
between analog and digital. And one of the ways I do, and I ever since I kind of formulated that years ago. I mean, I tell people that I have an analog and a digital desk in the studio. So like this is the digital desk. This looks like everyone else's desk, the one I'm sitting at. But then over there is my analog desk, and that doesn't have anything digital on it. And that's where I work. That's where I like make stuff. And I think a lot of artists have that set up, but like I try to be very explicit for people like that. So one of the things I tell people who aren't artists who want to be more creative is I'm like, you need an analog desk. You need a place where none of this stuff that talks to you and chirps back at you and brings the world into your space when you don't want it is. But I like to play with that. So one of the things that I do in my newsletter is I make these zines, these like little handmade, like 6-page zines that are just made from a single sheet of paper. And what I found out a while back is that, oh, you know what I can do is I can make one of these, make a PDF of it, and put it online. And then people download it, and they can't really read it as a PDF because it's all wonky and weird. It's like upside down and stuff. But they have to print it out then. And then they have to make the booklet themselves with their own hand. I have a video showing them how to do it. So that is one of my favorite things to do in the newsletter is to make a new zine, upload a PDF, and then where people can download it, and then watch people do it. Because what I'm doing is it's like I'm making this thing. It's like a very explicit thing of what I'm doing most of the time with my work is I'm making this analog thing, then I'm digitizing it, putting it online, and then asking people to make it into an object themselves and use their hands. Because I think most people just like don't use their hands anymore. They don't,
Hmm.
I think people need to tinker and to fuddle about. I feel like that's something that's very I was talking to some other British people recently, and I was saying that there's a great Orwell essay that I love where he's talking about the British penchant for hobbies and puttering and tinkering and stuff, and how that's kind of a resistance to fascism because it's like you're still an individual, you're doing your little thing, or you're having a pint at the pub, or like whatever. And I was talking to a few other people like, yeah, that's kind of disappearing a little bit. But yeah, I kind of get what, we're always romanticizing each other, I think, from across the pond.
Yeah.
But I do feel like people need hobbies. Like one of the things I love to think about is like there are so many of these tech barons that, like Elon Musk, I'm always like, this is a guy that needs to take up woodworking. Like,
Yeah.
if this guy, I'm always like, if Elon just would take up woodworking and have a shop, it would solve so many of our problems. Because these guys, their hobby is like ruining the world, right? Like, that's their hobby.
Yeah, it's
Their
true.
hobby.
I listened to the Daily Stoic, and I heard you on there talking to Ryan
Yeah,
about that, about
yeah,
Hitler should have gone to
exactly.
art school, and
I
it's
mean,
so
yeah,
true. It's so
yeah.
true. By the way, I loved your Elon should be deep into World War II books at the time of his life. That's fantastic.
Well, like
But
Trump
it's
wasn't.
true.
We're dealing with this guy who used to be a TV host. I mean, he was like a bad real estate guy, and then he was a TV show host, and now he's the president. And he wasn't really a problem when he was a TV show host. And that's the thing
Mhm.
about the arts, because everyone wants to talk about how artists are so great and like, oh, creative people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, the other thing about the arts is that you kind of take these people that aren't great at life and you have a place for them. You have something
Mhm.
for them to do. you know? And what's weird now is that we exist in this time where the arts have been so devalued and kind of shrunk and stuff that now we kind of police ourselves in this like way that like, well, artists need to be good people, you know? And I'm like, and it's kind of funny because I'm like, well, the problem is if you kick all the people you think are bad out of the arts, you know what they're going to do, right? They're going to go into the real world. You know, the arts at least is this kind of like, kind of this I love the way Brian Eno is a hero of mine. And the way that Brian Eno talks about what artists do is they create these worlds for us to step into and say, do I like this? Is this the kind of world I want to be in? And sometimes it's a beautiful world like Hockney's, and sometimes it's a nightmarish world like Bosch or something. And your art is the way that we play as adults, our little playgrounds. But I'm like, if we take these people like instead of creating a little playground for us to step into and be like, I don't know about this, if you put them in the real world, they're actually going to make the world into the thing instead. And so I'm always thinking about this because, and I know this is like people like kind of roll their eyes, but I'm like, imagine a world in which Fred Trump had told Donald Trump, hey man, yeah, great, go to Broadway. Be a queen, just, be a Broadway producer. That's what you want to do. Like, it's
Yeah.
obviously what he should have done. Like, this guy loves cats. He loves, you know what I mean? Like, a liberated young Trump, you say, you
Yeah.
know, you
Well,
know?
when you strip it right back, it's about releasing those big feelings and big emotions, which kids are good at doing. And when they're facilitated in a way that you're brilliantly documented in this book, it is magic. It goes back to that word. And yeah, I interviewed a local drama teacher. She's a drama and English teacher, and she
Yeah.
loves theatre. And she told me that invariably the kids who are the first banging on her door every session are the ones who've been booted out of the other lessons.
Yep.
And one of the things she gets them to do is throw a chair across the room in the first session because
Amazing.
it's a good thing in drama. And it actually takes them a little while to get them to do it because they're so used to
They're
being
like,
bollocked for it,
I'll be
and their
thrown out.
identities are built on mischief or misdemeanors. That
Yeah.
when they do it, they go, and that's a good thing in here. And she goes, yeah, and this is why. And then they move forward. But to go back to the kids, so my daughter came down from a bath and they were 4 at the time.
Uh-huh.
And absentmindedly, I'm washing up, I'm sorting the kitchen out. My wife's taking care of the bath. And I noticed a little Kinder chocolate bar on top of the microwave. And without even thinking, I just unwrapped, shoved it in. You know what you do when you're tired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then they come downstairs and she goes, right, that's, good girl, you can have that chocolate bar now. And I think, oh shit. And so she turns around and I goes, I'm so sorry, I've just eaten it. Like I can run up to the shop and get another one. And my daughter looks at me with absolute fire in her eyes. And she ran across the room, dragged a drawer open, pulled out a pencil and a piece of paper, and practically ripped the paper she was drawing so hard. But do you know the famous painting, the Saturn devours his son?
Yeah.
It was like that. She drew this big warped version of her with my legs hanging out of her mouth, and handed it to me and went, "Daddy," and that was it. And but what a beautiful way to express that rage
Right.
in such a primal, unconsidered, like raw moment like that.
Yeah.
If only these world leaders had been taught to do that.
Well, and that's why the arts are so important is to give kids that outlet, to give them a place where it's okay to throw a chair. It's okay to be naughty here.
Mhm.
Um, that my, I don't teach a lot, and I always thought I would end up in the classroom, but kind of the joy of my life is that so many teachers use my stuff in class. And one of the things they use in class are these newspaper blackout poems that if anyone who's listening hasn't seen them, they look like if the CIA did haiku. Basically, it's like a text where I black out almost everything, like a redacted government document, and there's like just a few words left. And teachers use them in the class a lot. And the thing I love to hear is the teachers will say, yeah, who's really good at these are the quote unquote worst students, the ones who aren't usually free with their writing assignments or whatever. They know exactly what to do because it's destructive. Like they're ready. They're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take a marker to this stupid piece of writing that this I've had to read for this dumb class or whatever. And then the good kids aren't very good at it, actually. They're like, they're kind of like, oh, I don't know. They're like kind of frozen up. And I think a lot of us, especially those of us who end up being a little successful in our careers or we manage to make it this long, I think sometimes we turn into the good kids, you know? Like I think that happens. Like you're like, "Oh, I need to be a good boy. Need to serve my audience, you know, I need to make sure that I don't do anything to make anyone upset, you know, oh, blah blah blah." And it's like and that's why I've always been interested in, I think failure is awful and it's rough and it's hard to get through, but so is success for the artist. Like success is almost as unnavigatable as failure, and the reason is that once you realize that people are watching, that can be just as paralyzing, if not more, than nobody's watching, you know. And so I think that like for me, it's like, you know, what do you make when no one's watching is a great question. Can you find a time in your day where you make stuff that you're probably not supposed to, where you can do things that you're probably not so can you make some time to be that naughty kid who throws the chair across the room in drama class, you know? Like, can you give yourself that kind of space? Because that's what the drama teacher is doing. They're creating new conditions under which those kids can unleash the things that are in them, but it's a safe space, you know, it's a safe
Hmm.
space to play. And I think that that's what the studio needs to be. I mean, I think for a lot of us, the studio becomes a factory. It becomes a place where we crank stuff out and we work. Gotta get to work, you know, like gotta, you know, I'm a professional. I gotta get to work, you know. And I've always really loved what William Kentridge says, is he goes, the studio is a safe place for stupidity. You know, it's a place for me to go. It's like the inside of my brain. I can bounce against the walls. I can make stupid stuff. I can be as dumb as I want to. I can be as silly as I want to. And that's something that I think, you know, you've experienced this with your girls. It's like silliness is extremely powerful.
Yes.
It's very underrated because the moment you start acting silly or being silly, you're in this playful state that's generative, you know. Once you turn your, you know, once you, you know, you're just
Well,
like, hey.
I've never told this on the podcast, but you know, I've got it's within the confines of a fantasy Premier League, a very insular, very raw group. But
Okay.
I've got a WhatsApp sticker of my own ass with my own face on it. Now, it's the best thing I've ever created. And I mean that. It's because it's done through sheer childishness, through sheer
Yes.
immaturity, because
Yes.
that's what we do. We're all dads, we're all working, and like you said, we're all to some degree stuck in that factory. That's one of a thousand stupid things that I've got going on in my private life. But
Yes.
I've always allowed myself to take just enough of that into my emotional creativity to keep moving my career forward. It's the reason I'm talking to you now. It's the reason that I'm writing fiction that maybe 10 people will read, but it will open another door somewhere else in my career and connect me with amazing, interesting people and attune me to that magic. And again, to go back to kids, that's what kids do so freely. And another thing that we can learn from them.
I mean, what you just said is like, I'm gonna write this fiction. I don't know if anyone else will ever read it, but it's gonna open this other door to me. That faith that everything is connected in our creative work, that everything, if we give it enough time and attention, will talk to the other thing. Everything will connect and will see us through to where we need to go. And I think that that is with kids sense that everything's connected. In fact, part of what we call growing up psychologically is the kid individualizing, right? Like I'm not good at the psychology stuff, but like it's the kid saying, "Oh, wait, I'm separate from mama. Mama's a separate thing from me. Oh, wait, the tree is not me. I'm not the tree." And in a sense, that's a regression. We call it progress. It's the way that they, you know, can survive our world. But if you think about it, the great trajectory is you're part of everything when you start. And then hopefully by the end, when you die, you realize you're part of everything, right? And then it's only in the middle that messes us up. It's a little like it's a little maybe a little far, but I think what you're saying is having that faith that I'm going to do these things that are calling to me, and I don't know how they fit. I don't know why I'm doing that. You know, people ask me that all the time. They're like, "Why do you make these mixtapes?" Because I make actual analog mixtapes uh on cassette. And I say, "I don't know. I like it." You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And I
yeah.
don't know. I don't know. I like it, but it's funny, the more that I make these mixtapes, the more I think about music, which is one of my great loves, and the more I think about what music's supposed to do for me. And then I start thinking about sequencing. Like when I'm putting a book together, I'm like, what would make this a good mix? Like what chapter should flow into the next chapter? What if we put this chapter at the beginning? Because everyone who's made a mixtape where you actually have to listen to it front to back knows what that's like. Okay, I'm going to start with this song and then I'm going to take you this part. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
Mhm.
but I didn't start out thinking when I make these mixtapes, it's going to teach me to be a better writer. I was just like, I want to make mixtapes. But the brain, if we let it, our brains will connect everything to everything, and we'll get in that state. So I just, this has been really fun for me. I love hearing you're giving me so much to think about. This is a real gift, this
Well, first of all,
conversation.
thank you, thank you. But no, first of all, I don't think that's too far at all. I think everything, you only have to look out the window or walk outside to see that everything's
Yeah,
connected. That's the
everything
cycle of nature.
is.
Of
Everything
course it
is
is.
connected.
And even on a subatomic level, to get into that realm, you write
Right.
about in the book about this idea that ideas exist outside of you. I'm a huge believer in that.
Yeah.
There's a reason why things sometimes don't happen or take years to happen, or that kind of sequential thing where things will come into your life in a seemingly random but poetic order. And whenever I've followed that thread, great things have happened, interesting things have happened. So I continue to do it. And this is sort of getting into that territory of the misconception of we have, confidence comes before action. No, no, no. It's completely the other way around.
Yeah.
Like I've heard you say, and I can't remember where. I listened to a few other interviews to prepare for this, but you talked about just making something, making a mark. And whenever I get a fresh illustration commission through the door, I shit myself over the blank page, and it's like every
Yeah.
time I think I've lost
Yeah.
it. How have I ever done, upheld this charade and all that stuff that goes on with it in a critic. But I'm aware of that now, so I push it with one side and I just splash some ink on a page, or I make a line
Yep.
and guarantee you the first thing that I put on paper that feels good in some way to me unlocks everything, and then everything
Yeah.
else comes. Not
Yeah.
always easily, but it comes and I'm in the flow, and then that's it. Whereas that paralysis, that anticipation, and it goes into that other thing you said in the book about you don't need a vision. And I think that applies to career, to life. It's about feeling and being attuned to things, and making, responses according to that. That's where the joy is in life. Otherwise you become that factory worker that you mentioned.
I mean, so what you're describing, I remember the first time I ever saw Ralph Steadman draw, um, in his shed, and he did the same thing. He's like, "All right, well, the first thing we do," and then he just took his ink pen and just went whoosh, like that, and just splashed the page, and just like, "Oh, look at that," and just watching him do that, I was like, "Oh my God, that's it! Just get something." It really was like a therapy session watching him do that. But kids will do that, right? Oh, watch this, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that so yeah, the vision thing is really important to me because I think when I started out, I had this thing where, well, the really most important thing about creative work is to get good ideas and have them in your brain and to work on them and have a great idea before you get started. And now I think the absolute opposite. I think what's really important is to get started and to see what starts to appear and to let your hand teach your brain as much as your brain is teaching your hand. And one of the things that got me thinking about, we talked about imagination earlier. I used to be very, you know, imagination, I used to be like, is this very simple thing. It's like you think of a door and you see it or whatever. And, picture a door. There you go. There's your imagination. But then I found out about this thing called aphantasia. And it's when people can't make mental images in their heads. And it's something like 2 to 5% of the population. Like if you ask someone, can you picture an apple in your head? Like, can you see what color it is? Can you see what texture it is? Can you can you rotate it? Can you look at it? A lot of hypervisual people like me can be like, yeah, I know what it looks like. I could, whatever. My wife is a person who can't. She doesn't picture things in her head that way. She could tell you what an apple's kind of like and like what an apple is,
Mm.
whatever. But and I discovered this about her, and she has a master's degree in architecture. So, so as I was learning about aphantasia, one of the people that has it is this guy named Ed Catmull, who, co-founded Pixar and ran it for a long time. And he says, okay, so if you can see an apple in your head, does that help you draw it? He's like, it's still almost impossible to draw what's in your head. So why would you think that having pictures in your head is some kind of creative superpower? He said, there are a ton of animators here at Pixar. They have to make a million sketches before they'll get that thing that they're looking for. And the beautiful thing about it is that they stumble onto things that they didn't know they were looking for, which is the whole point of creative work in my mind, pun intended. Um, and I just this rotated, this like shifted everything in my brain because I thought, what if you go about your work more like an aphantasiac, where it's like, I have a picture, even if you have a picture in your head, it's like, I have a picture in my head of how I want this to go, but I'm gonna hold it very lightly. And the minute things start happening on the page, I'm gonna let go. Because I think what kills a lot of people is that they have all these ideas in their head about what this next painting is going to look like, about what their year is going to look like, about what their life is going to look like. And the minute things on the page or out in their life don't match the picture in their head, they either get depressed or they want to give up or they like whatever. And so again, it's that idea of like visions can be just as destructive to us as not having a vision. And so in my that was just a long-winded way of saying I have learned to start from that place that you're talking about, where it's just like that kind of beginner's mind, kind of emptiness, like, hey, it's okay to have a vision, but I think the thing that I'm really the line that I didn't put in the book and I haven't put anywhere yet, really, I think I put it in the newsletter, is like, your plan gets you as far as the desk. Basically, your plan gets you as far as the studio, right? It gets you to the desk, and then all bets are off, right? It's like the Mike Tyson thing. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's got a plan until they pick up the pencil, like that. And to be open to what's happening on the page. And I think that's what kids do. Kids are like, whatever's happening on the page, that's what's happening. And if you can get in that zone, whether it's strumming a guitar, whether it's kneading clay, whether it's drawing an illustration, if you can just be there and be in that experience and let what wants to appear versus what you've got in here. I just think it's like this really beautiful, creatively fruitful place to be. And I can't help but think in terms of whatever I learn from being with paper and ink helps me when I'm out in the world, because I'm thinking to myself, and this is why I think that the traditional idea that parenting or having kids ruins your creativity or whatever, I really wanted to push back on this, because the thing I noticed is the more I learned with my kids, the more I could bring that stuff in the studio and vice versa. I was like, hey, when you come into the studio with a big plan and then you try to like do everything according to plan and it doesn't go right, it feels terrible, right? Why do you not think that's the same when you take your kids on a day out? Like, if you start with this plan, you're like, I'm going to do this thing with my kids, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this, and then things start going awry. But this wasn't the plan. It'll ruin your day, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, this is happening now. Let's see what happens, right? It's the same, like with a blank page, it's the same with a
Yeah.
blank day,
It's almost
you know?
Buddhist, isn't it? It's almost Buddhist. It's
I
like,
think
it's that
so.
idea of radical acceptance of the current moment. And there's great
Yeah.
comfort in that, but there's also great curiosity in that. And this is the thing too. You mentioned there about how boring to think that everything's mapped out when we're leading with the word creativity, because that's not creativity. That's just design labor, you
And
know?
to get back to the AI stuff, is like, AI is for people who know exactly what they want. And I'm not like that. That's not how I work. I don't know what I want when I start. I don't operate that way. If I knew
Mhm.
what I wanted and I could picture it, I almost wouldn't even need to make it. I'm at that point in my career anyway. Is that when I start on a book, I know I want a book at the end, but I don't know for sure what it's going to be, and I'm hoping it's much different than when I started out,
Yeah.
because if not, I didn't go anywhere. right? I
Yep.
didn't learn anything. And so, like AI for me right now, it's like, well, I want a picture of like Donald Trump rotting in the sun by the pool or whatever. Like whatever it is. Okay, well, okay, there it is. That's about what the most average, person who made that's completely average, right? Because it's mathematically average. Yep, there's a
Yeah.
picture of Donald Trump melting in the sun, whatever it is, So it's like, but for me, it's like, what if you start if I was trying to draw Donald Trump rotting in the sun or something, and I ended up drawing my uncle instead. You know what I mean? Like if I started drawing Donald Trump and it ended up looking like my uncle, well, wait a minute, what's that mean? Right? And all of a sudden I'm in, you know what I'm saying? Just like something like that. I don't know. I just made that up. I would never,
I love
I
it.
would, you
That's
know what I
so
mean?
good.
But it's like that's the kind of stuff that happens where you actually learn about yourself and what's in
Yeah.
here. One of the things another thing I rage against is not only this idea that you need to have an idea before you get started, this idea that you need to know who you are before you get to work. No, who you are comes out through the work.
Yeah.
And one of the frightening and terrifying things about creative work is it'll teach you who you are. And some people aren't ready for that. I mean, I made a piece a while back. It was a collage and it said, God talks to you. He says the last thing you want to hear. And it was like, and it was like, that's what art, like, that's what my work does a lot of the time is it tells me the last thing I want to hear. And then what I have to do is I have to accept it and I have to say, all right, well, what is this? What is this telling me? What is this telling me about who I really am? And that's what the creative life will do for you. It's not about being rich. It's not about like changing the world. It's about, at a very basic level, discovering it's like discovering what you're made of, who you are, like what it even means to be you, or to see you can uncover so much. And I think
Yeah.
that's what I'm interested in right now is like who the hell am I? I don't
It's
know until I'm working.
It's fascinating. I was always, you mentioned Stedman. I spent my first year at university on my illustration degree trying to be Ralph Steadman
Right,
before
yeah.
realizing I had to then go my own way. And that's a very natural process too.
You had to
We all
become
copy
Ben.
and then go, well, why was I drawn to
Absolutely.
that? What does it say about me? Ultimately, it took me years to kind of post rationalize, but now I move forward with this knowledge that where I'm from, which is a post industrial, small working class mill town, very gritty. It was described as a giant Star Wars bar by a drunk person once, which is the best description I've heard of that town
Wow.
because it's packed with eccentrics and,
Yeah.
myths and legends. And that is its own kind of magic, but that is reflected in the way that I interview, the way that I write, the way that I draw, the way that I conduct myself as a human being. But it's taken art to teach me that. And that's a beautiful thing. And I want that for
Yeah.
my kids. I'm interested in whether
Yeah.
you have seen that in your kids, in them, in terms of their self awareness growing through their creativity, or is it too young for that?
I think they're tweens now. One thing I will say is that's the other thing kids will do is they'll show you parts of yourself that you tried to tamp down or forgotten about or had cut off. And I think that's really real. I know a writer named Dan Shawn who was adopted, and he was in an interview one time. He said, the first time I saw a blood relative was when my kids were born. And that really like blew my mind because I just thought, wow, the first time you like kind of see yourself reflected in any kind of other creature is like from your kids. But then I read that years ago, and then when I'm looking at my kids, sometimes I see parts of myself. I'm like, oh, sometimes it's stuff like, yeah, I had to work that out. Other times I'm like, oh, that's the part of me that I had to lop off like Cinderella to fit in the slipper. And that's like that can be, again, it's just like art. It's like they'll show you the most beautiful parts of yourself, they'll show you the worst parts of yourself. It's everything is connected, like we were talking about. But yeah, I feel like, like it's been interesting to watch like one kid of mine. One of my kids has just been musical from the very beginning and just this incredible sense of melody. He just has he can pick up things on the piano. He's self-taught. He's just like, so and I watch him kind of go in and out of orbit with music because I believe that we kind of orbit ourselves and we go in and out of phase where we kind of like get away from our kind of natural stuff. My neighbor, who I mentioned earlier in this conversation, he's a physics junkie and he's an old wastewater engineer, and he was trying to describe to me, we were a few cognacs in, so I didn't fully grasp everything he was talking about. He's like talking about ellipses with orbits. It'd be one thing if planets had perfect circular orbits, but planets don't do that. They have ellipses. And so there are times where the planets are further away from the thing that they're orbiting, and that creates interesting things. And I think it's true of ourselves. I think we move in spirals and circles in our lives, but I think we go in and out of orbit basically, like where we're further away from our core and sometimes we're closer. That's what I've experienced with my kids. Because the thing that really blew my mind, and I don't know if you've experienced this with your daughters, but I used to believe so much in nurture and like, oh, you could take someone and put them in the right environment and really shape them or whatever. And the minute I had kids, I was like, oh, there's a lot of nature here. Like this person is essentially was like this in the beginning, and there has
Yeah.
been a through line. And I think that part of like life is just going in and out of that orbit of the self, that thing that you are. And I have feel like there's forces that push us further out of orbit. I think sometimes school does that, like, and not on purpose, not because this was something I thought a lot about with the book is that sometimes the things that really care about us, the institutions or the people that are supposed to really care about us, that supposedly have our best interests in mind, they're the ones that can screw us up the most actually, because the people that don't like you, the people that hate you, the people that are not on your side, those are the people that are like really easy to tune out. In your, you can be like, well, I'm not going to listen to them. They're just assholes or whatever. It's the people that really care about you and what they say and the things they say in with your best interests in mind. That's the stuff that really mess you up. And that's an important thing to learn too that my kids really taught me. I remember one time, my son Owen used to draw these beautiful drawings, but he like would hold the marker in his fist like this,
Mm.
with the marker pointed down. And this was fine. And I don't know why I even thought, but one day I was like, he's going to wreck his wrist. And when he goes to school, they're going to try to teach him the right way to hold the pencil. It's going to be a problem. So maybe I'll head off this problem. Typical dad idiocy, right? There is no problem, but you're like, well, there might be, so let me fix it earlier. And I showed him how to hold a pencil the right way, and like immediately his line went away, just disappeared. That magical line he had, the way that he drew, just like disappeared.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when I got older, I was watching people draw or painters and stuff, and this is not an unnatural way, actually, because this is a very gestural way of drawing. If you do that with your fist, you can really get into it. And so, yeah, that was just like one thing, but it really taught me that the problem with being a creative person is you got to look out for the people who love you as much as the people who hate you, because the people who love, no one can tell you what to do, or they shouldn't. It really should come from you. And the people who love you can push you to do the things that you really shouldn't be doing. And it just takes a lot of courage. And that was like a really big, and it was good to learn that early with the kids, because I always ask myself as a parent, okay, what baggage am I bringing to the situation? Is this a problem right now? Is this a problem? Am I, yeah, like, is this a problem? Is a big question I ask myself a lot of times. And I just see myself out, just a light touch, like, especially when they're tweens, because, like, now that they're this age, you're kind of there for what Lisa D'Amour calls tender generic support. You're kind of there to be the ambient presence. You're less of a producer and more like a recording engineer in the studio. I can't help but think of like music metaphors,
Well, I love that.
you're less like Rick Rubin being like, okay, well, what if you all swapped instruments or like whatever? You're more like Steve Albini. You're just like running the boards and playing poker in the background. Like, I'm here to get down what sound you guys make. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I like kind of like that's the way I think about it now. But yeah, I think that like in my own, I remember vividly my second book, Steal Like an Artist had just come out, so that was my second book, and then my third book was called Show Your Work. And I was on a plane. I was going to do some kind of marketing talk or something. I was on a plane. I just come up with the outline for the book for Show Your Work. I had like the whole list of 10. It like came on the airplane because I love working on airplanes. You're like strapped in a seat, airplane mode, right? Like it really is.
Yeah.
Like you can't have your device. I think Wi-Fi is like totally deleterious on planes. I'm like, you should never pay for Wi-Fi. You should never sign up for it. You should take that time you're on a plane to really just be gone and be in that. So anyway, but I had figured this out. I got off the plane, and this guy I really looked up to, who I still do, and is a very, like, has always been a great supporter of mine, and has nothing, always been nothing but kind. I went into that uh, lunch. I had lunch with him. He was speaking at the same marketing conference, and we sat down to lunch. He's like, so tell me about what you're working on. And I should have known right then, oh, I'm working on a book, it's going well, and not talk too much about it. But I'm such a mouthy person, as everyone who's listening to this knows by now. Like, I love talking. I love talking about what I'm working on. And I was talking about what I was working on. He says, you know what you should do? Can I borrow your notebook? And I was like, oh, sure, yeah. And he took my notebook and he said, here's the cover and here's what it's called. And he gave it, like, he drew a cover and he wrote the title of the book and he gave it back to me. And I was like, wow, this guy really cares about this is a really nice thing that he's doing for me. And it fucked me up for like days afterwards and sent me into this death spiral because I had been working on this thing and I'd finally figured it out. And here's this like kind of caring mentor figure who's like, this is what you should do next. And it really just threw me for a spin. And thank God I'm married to the woman that I am married to, who's my editor, my first reader. And she said, fuck that guy. Don't, you had it. Go back to what you got. You know what I mean? But that's just, I was 20, I was 30. I wasn't
Mhm.
like a kid. I was like a 30-year-old, and that's still that impressionable. I thought, well, this person really cares about me. He seems to care about my work and like gave me this great gift. He knows I'm trying to work on this thing, and just screwed me up completely. So those kind of things can happen over and over again. And so one of the things I do now that I'm an older person, and God help the people that come to me for advice, like, but like when I'm dealing with younger people and especially my kids, the first thing I'd say is, do you need help? That's the first thing, because a lot of the time the answer is no. I don't need help. I'm good. I'm good, Dad. Great. And if you do need help, do you want to know my opinion? You know? And just to lightly, to not just, because I think a lot of us think, oh, wisdom is always like, teaching is always good. It's always good to be taught and to impart wisdom. And actually it can be a violent act. It can be a kind of projection. It can be a forced nasty thing to put our learning on someone who's trying to figure something out, because what we're doing is we're taking away from them the chance to figure it out on their own. And that was something that I learned really early on. And so now, even when colleagues like will send me a manuscript or something, I'll say, what kind of feedback do you want on this? Do you just want me to be like, yeah, this is cool? Or like, do you want line edits? What stage are you at? I'm very light about, what do you need from me? And to try to really figure out with them, like, okay, is what I'm saying, does that make sense? And
It
it
absolutely makes sense, and it makes me think of you used music as your kind of modeling, and I often go to sport, big sports fan, and I think of great coaches like Sir Alex Ferguson, who I loathed growing up just because of team allegiance,
Okay, yeah,
and
yeah.
but he, what I found out from a book, his biography, was that he didn't even do the coaching. He would just watch from the kind of upper window of his little training ground office and would let the players like that. The famous Manchester United team that won the treble in 1999, they were coaching themselves. He had such belief in them that they had their on pitch leaders. There was such a high level there of standards that he knew that his job was to do exactly what you just described, and just kind of be and step in at the most diligent moments and know exactly when to step in. And there's this story about how he sat down next to Wayne Rooney before the Champions League final in the dressing room, and he just leaned over and he said, remember where your granddad came from. And it was just his way of removing the fact he was on like 200 grand a week and he was a celebrity, and it just brought him
Oh,
right back to his why. That is masterful coaching, and that's there's Ben Ryan. I interviewed Ben Ryan, who's a gold medal winner with Fiji Rugby Sevens, and he said he had this kind of speech planned before the final to motivate his team. And when he walked in the dressing room, he managed to kill his ego enough to recognize that they were just popping the ball nonchalantly. They were sitting around having drinks, their socks were rolled down. He thought they've won this before they've even got on the pitch. My job here is to fuck off.
Yeah. Because you
And
play
that
sports
is,
just like you play music, right? You play.
yeah. Yeah,
Like,
but for parenting and for creative mentoring, it's really the same. It's about trusting.
yep,
It's about trusting, motivating in a sense that you give them the space, the tools that you talk about in your book, and
trusting.
then and you just step in at the moments when you really know it. And to do that, I think you have to know who you're working with. You have to know the personality, and
Yes,
that's where the skill is. And it sometimes it takes an ego death to actually do that, but it's true.
absolutely. And trusting, that's something I learned from the writer John Holt, who wrote a bunch about child development and how kids learn. He said, everything I'm saying is to trust the child. Trust that the child is trying to live like that they're trying to learn, they're trying to become who they are and to trust them. And he said the problem is that most of us growing up have been taught not to trust ourselves. Like a lot of us have been taught, don't trust yourself because you're not trustworthy. And I think that the older I get, for the creative people I speak to, it's like you've got to learn to trust yourself. You got to learn to trust yourself. There's the American writer Emerson. There's a famous essay called Self-Reliance, which people misinterpret when they read that to be about how you can only rely on yourself, which actually is not what that's not what that essay is about, actually. What Emerson is talking about is that there's a core in here that if you can learn to listen to it, that it will guide you. And you have to cultivate that thing and start listening to it. And I think a lot of men in particular, when we get to our age, um, we just don't have that internal compass. Like a lot of guys just don't have it. Because they've just been taught, don't trust your feelings, don't listen to your guts, don't just plod on, be stoic, be just follow the plan, do the things. And the older I get, the more I'm just like, there's a great line from a writer who has one of the best names ever, Verling Klinkenborg, and he
Oof.
says he has a book called Several Short Sentences About Writing, which is one of my favorite books about writing. And would help if there are visual people who are listening who would like to learn to be better writers. I think that book could help you because one of the things that Klinkenborg recommends is that you write every sentence on a new line, almost like poetry. And I think for those of us who are visual, that's very helpful, but that's a detour. And the thing that Klinkenborg says is that who will give you the authority to believe that the things that you notice are worth noticing? He says, no one. It will have to be you. And that's what kids have, that internal authority. They're like, no one needs to tell me what I like and what I don't like. I like what I like and I do what I want to do. And like they have that kind of sense of internal authority. And we all have access to it, but we have to give ourselves permission to say, wait a minute, I'm the expert on me. There's no one who can ever be the expert on me. When you're talking about coaches, it made me think about my wife because my wife edits everything that I do. And she has learned over time that being a great editor is like half her architect. It's the cool thing about being an editor is you're basically a therapist that gets to fix things. So you kind of therapize the writer, but then you get to fix the manuscript. There's something that you can actually, like an object that you can fix. And the thing that fixes me every time when I write something and it's just not there yet, she doesn't have to tell me. She looks at me and she says, what did you really want to say? And I look at her and I go, and I say it. And she goes, she doesn't have to say anything else. And I go, all right. And I go back out, and it's the best. What did you really want to say? She just holds it. And sometimes I can self edit now because she's given me that space. And that's what the best coaches do. They like, what was the kind of space that the coach put me in when I was at my best? Can I do that for myself now? So there are times where I'll sit in here and I'll be like writing something. I'll be like, God, this is dog shit. This is really bad. Um, And I just think to myself, what do you really want to say? How would you say it to at cognac night? What would you say? And so like the gifts that and I think that's like with my kids is I just want to be that coaching presence. I want to do what you talked about. I want to be up in the box or I want to go into the room and be like, they've got this. I want to
Hmm.
have that, but to be there when they break down and they need it, but
Yeah.
to otherwise just be that ambient presence and they know that I'll always be there for them.
Yeah.
But the artist life is such a solitary one in so many ways that we have to learn to do that for ourselves. So the question is like, how do you do that for yourself? Well, as we talked about earlier, you don't have to believe in yourself, right? You really don't. Like I mean, you just have to do the stuff. And that's
Yeah.
the thing I tell myself over and over again, because I know my limitations. I know what I'm dealing with. I know how rotten I am. I know how lazy I am. I know all these things about myself. And the job is to put that aside and pretend like I'm great, or just not even pretend, just to make stuff, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Show
Like,
up, do
why
the
not?
work,
Show
take
up
an
and do the
action,
work,
and
make
feel it,
stuff.
and
Yep.
follow the feeling and trust it. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's habit forming, isn't it? You just
Yeah.
practice, practice, practice. I could talk to you all day. I'm going to have to let you go in a minute. But no, I think speaking of editors, but my fiction editor, I both love and hate him for coming up with the best title that I'll probably ever give anything. And I wrote this story about ghost discrimination. And
Oh,
it's about a TV psychic who is
okay.
being haunted by a rapper's ghost because he denied the presence of the ghost, thinking that people wanted the zeitgeist ghost, which was old ladies and Edwardian boys. And I was struggling for a title for this ridiculous story. And again, this is the stuff where I probably think I probably shouldn't write that story, but I'm going to do because I've got this idea and I think it's good. And he came back and he just went, "How about Died in Prejudice?" And I just went, and like I almost shouted in the cafe when he came back to me with that. But again, it's the outside presence, and that's a form of coaching. It's
Yeah.
just someone who sees you and gets you, but they only see you and get you if you learn yourself to be yourself. Anyway,
So yeah, that too. So the Michael Crichton, who wrote like Jurassic Park and all those other books, he said that the job of the editor is you're building a ship, but you're inside the ship. You're down in the boiler room, and the editor stands on the dock and says, "It's a speedboat. You're building a speedboat." You know, like you think you're building like a sailboat or a big pirate ship, and the editor says, "It's a speedboat." you know, Shouting from the decks. And I do think, and actually, titles are tricky for me because I rarely come up with my own titles. I usually have to steal them from somewhere. But I do think really good advice is to let someone else title your stuff, is to have that kind of like, what do you think? Oh, there you go. Died in
yep,
Prejudice. Yeah.
yeah.
Love it.
Uh,
This has been
well,
really fun.
yeah, no, likewise, Austin. Thank you very much. And the book's incredible. I'm glad you
Thank
wrote it.
you.
It was a joy to read. Kids, don't call it art. Yeah, don't call it art. It's just about, it's because in my notes I've got kids, don't call it art from one of your quotes. So,
That's
um,
right.
but it's a brilliant book. When is it out?
It's out in the States June 2nd, and I think it's same in the UK. I think it's out June 2nd. I think we're having like a worldwide release, which is weird. I've never had
Yeah.
that before, which is kind of fun. So, yeah, and anyone who wants to know more about the book, call the crib, same number, same hood. I'm austinkleon.com, and my website will spit you out to all the books and the newsletter that I do. If you've liked my ramblings in the past, hour or so, you might like my free Friday newsletter. That's a list of 10 things I share every week. It's kind of my favorite thing I do, and that's where a lot of people like kind of discover me for the first time. It's a good way to kind of get an inside look at my world.
Tremendous. I'll get all the links out there and thank you ever so much. This has been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. This has been a real gift, Ben, so thank you.